Two families, two worlds, a gift nobody could afford, and a funeral nobody will ever forget. Two people who were laughed at, looked down on, and counted out, right up until the moment the room went silent. Right now, you are getting both stories back to back. The first, a thrift store gift that turned an auctioneer pale and shattered crystal at a 65th birthday. The second, a smirking uncle at a casket who had no idea Papa had been recording him for 3 years. By the time you finish both, you will understand why some families deserve exactly what they get. Get comfortable. Pour something slow. These two endings hit harder than you are ready for. Let's begin. The dining room of Victor Hallberg's estate looked like something from a magazine. Crystal glasses caught the chandelier light. The mahogany table stretched the length of the room, set with gold-rimmed plates and perfectly folded linen. 40 guests filled every chair. Business partners, old friends, people who wore their wealth like armor. It was Victor's 65th birthday dinner. I had been dreading it for 3 weeks. I sat beside my husband Daniel, hands tight in my lap. I had brought a gift, wrapped in brown paper, tied with plain string the way my grandfather always packed things he truly cared about. It didn't look expensive, but I had driven 6 hours, and I knew exactly what it was. Victor reached for it before the appetizers were even cleared. He turned it over, and a slow smile crossed his face. The kind that means something unkind is already coming. "Is this a thrift store relic?" he said. Loud enough for everyone. Laughter spread instantly. A woman near the window lifted her phone to record. Daniel sat beside me and said absolutely nothing. "My name is Thora Morgan. I'm 33 years old, and the proud owner of a small but thriving thrift store. Before I dive into what happened next, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Also, drop your city and local time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone's tuning in from." All right, back to the story. Victor peeled back the wrapping, glanced inside, and let out a sharp laugh. He placed it on the table's edge like something disposable. "You should have asked before you touched it," I said quietly. Victor smirked and gave a small nod to a nearby waiter. The waiter stepped forward to take my gift away. Something inside me had already made a decision. I forced a smile. It was the only weapon I had, and it felt useless. The waiter carried my gift to the sideboard at the far end of the room, and I tracked it the entire way. My hands trembled under the table, not only from embarrassment, though that was there, but from something I'd been pressing down for a very long time. This was not the first time. 6 years of marriage to Daniel meant 6 years inside the orbit of Victor Hallberg. 6 years of comments that landed soft enough to deny, but sharp enough to leave a mark. "You're not exactly what we had in mind for Daniel. You should let him handle the finances." "Isn't that a little beyond your experience, Thora?" Each one small, each one deliberate. Daniel leaned toward me, his shoulder pressed against mine. For one stupid, hopeful second, I thought he was going to say something real. "Just ignore him," he whispered. 4 words, the same 4 words he always used. They broke something in me. Not loudly, just a quiet crack, deep in the chest, the kind that spreads slowly through everything attached to it. I looked at him. His eyes were already drifting back to the table conversation. "You always say that?" I whispered. He didn't answer. I excused myself during the dessert course. I needed air. Or at least the version available in a hallway that smelled like old wood and expensive cologne. I walked slowly, keeping my face even. Years inside Victor's world had taught me that showing pain was the same as offering it up to the person who caused it. I was almost at the bathroom when I heard Victor's voice through a half-open door. He was speaking to 2 longtime associates, the kind of men who laughed when Victor laughed and agreed when Victor spoke. I stopped. My feet just did it on their own. "She married up," Victor said clearly. "Let's not pretend otherwise. Daniel has always had a weakness for being needed. She figured that out quickly enough." One of the men said, "She seems like she tries." "That's exactly the problem," Victor replied. "Trying isn't the same as belonging." I stood completely still in that hallway. Sounds floated in from the dining room, silverware, ice and glasses, a brief burst of polite laughter. The embarrassment I had carried all evening changed shape. It hardened. It became something with edges and weight and direction. This was no longer about hurt. This was about a decision. I went back into the dining room carrying a different kind of calm. The waiter had left my gift on the sideboard, between a silver candlestick and a vase of white orchids. I walked to it without hurrying. I picked it up. The brown paper had been loosened when Victor tore into it, but the object itself was untouched. I smoothed my hands over it carefully. It was small, about the size of a thick book but heavier. Dark, aged wood with brass fittings along two edges. One side had a shallow groove worn into it by decades of the same hands reaching in the same spot. My grandfather's hands. I heard his voice then, the way I always did when I held it. Not quite a memory, more like a feeling that arrived wrapped in words. Never let fools decide what something is worth, Thora. Price and value are not the same thing. He had said that when I was 11, showing me what the casing held for the first time. I held the object the way it was meant to be held. Two hands. Firm, but careful. Across the room, a woman in a dark green dress had gone completely still. She had stopped mid-sentence in a conversation I couldn't hear. She wasn't staring rudely. She was watching the way someone watches a thing when they are trying to remember where they have seen it before. The woman in the dark green dress moved toward me slowly. She wasn't part of Victor's usual crowd. I had noticed her during dinner. She sat near the end of the table and spoke very little. She was in her mid-50s, silver hair pinned back neatly, with a quiet, focused way of moving that made her difficult to place. She looked like someone who spent a great deal of time examining things closely. She stopped a few feet away. Her eyes were on the object, not my face. "May I?" she said. Her voice was calm, unhurried, no performance in it at all. I hesitated only a moment, then I held it out. Victor was at the bar cart nearby. He glanced over and rolled his eyes, the gesture of a man who wants a room to share in his dismissal. He looked the way people look when they are certain nothing of interest is happening. The woman took the object in both hands. Carefully. She turned it slowly, examining each face of the casing. She brought it slightly closer near the brass fittings on the left side. Then she went still. Not frozen, completely focused. The conversation around her fell away. She turned it again, more deliberately. Her posture had changed, shoulders dropped, chin lifted slightly. Something had shifted in her, and it was significant. She turned the object one more time, tilting it toward the lamp. That was when she found it. Along the bottom edge of the left brass fitting, almost completely hidden by the aged wood beneath it, there was an engraving. Small enough to miss entirely unless you were looking for it, or unless you already knew it was there. 3 lines of text pressed fine as thread into the metal. Her breath caught, just barely. I heard it clearly. "Where did you get this?" she asked. She was looking at me now directly. Her voice was still level, but underneath it something was being held carefully in place. Victor had drifted back within earshot. He crossed his arms loosely. "From her imagination, probably," he said. A few guests nearby smiled. The woman didn't look at him. She didn't flinch or acknowledge the comment in any way. She kept her eyes steady on mine, as if Victor simply wasn't a presence worth responding to. "Where did you get this?" she said again. "My grandfather," I said. "He kept it his whole life. It was the last thing he left me." She nodded, once, slowly, and in her eyes I saw something I had not expected to find in that room on that night. Among those people. Recognition. She handed the object back gently and asked me to hold on to it. Then she excused herself and walked to the far corner near the hallway entrance. She pulled out her phone and dialed without searching for the number. She already had it. She turned slightly away and spoke in a voice I couldn't fully make out. But the energy in her body had shifted completely. She was not making polite conversation. Her free hand moved while she spoke, focused, deliberate. The movements of someone delivering urgent information. Other guests began to notice. Not because anything loud had happened, but because her stillness had become its own kind of signal. Conversations shortened. People glanced her way, then at each other. Victor noticed too. His smile stayed in place, but the ease behind it had drained away. He was losing the room's atmosphere and couldn't identify exactly why. He refilled his glass. I stayed where I was. I held my grandfather's object in both hands and did not move toward anyone or away from anyone. I had spent 6 years making myself smaller in Victor Hallberg's presence. Standing in the middle of his dining room, I decided I was done doing that. Whatever was unfolding, I was going to stand in it completely. 30 minutes later, there was a knock at the front door. A staff member answered it. A man stepped inside without waiting. He was in his early 60s. Lean, close-cut gray hair, a dark wool coat he hadn't removed. He carried a worn leather bag over one shoulder. He moved the way people move when they have been doing something serious for a long time and no longer need to announce it. He did not greet Victor. He did not acknowledge the room. He walked directly to the woman in the dark green dress, exchanged 3 short words with her, and turned to look at the object in my hands. He walked straight to me. "Leonard Strauss," he said. Brief handshake, firm. "May I see it?" He took the object with both hands the way she had. His examination was more methodical. He opened a small side panel along the brass fitting, one I hadn't known could open, and looked inside with a thin light from his coat pocket. The room had gone almost completely quiet. Victor appeared at the edge of the gathering. "What exactly is this?" he said, working hard to sound unbothered. Leonard did not answer him. "No one should touch this again," Leonard said to the room. "Not until I have finished." Victor stepped forward, chin up, voice carrying the tone he used with people he considered beneath him. "This is my house," he said. "I'd like to know what's happening in it." Leonard turned and looked at him briefly, not with hostility, with the settled patience of someone who has no reason to be impressed by the size of a man's home. "Then you'll have a few minutes to wait," Leonard said. He turned back to the object. Victor's jaw tightened. He scanned the room for someone who would agree with him. A few guests shifted their weight. No one spoke. Leonard quietly asked a staff member if there was a private room, somewhere with good light and a clear surface. The staff member looked at Victor. Victor gave a stiff nod. "The study," Victor said. Leonard walked toward the hallway. At the door, he stopped and turned to scan the set. He looked at Victor's face, at Daniel's, at the guests who had been laughing an hour before. His gaze moved across them all with unhurried calm. Then he looked at me. "The owner of the piece," he said quietly. "I'll need you with me." I followed him into the hallway. Behind me, the room went very still. I heard Victor exhale sharply through his nose. I was the only one he had asked to stay. The study was lined with shelves holding more decorative objects than books. Victor's taste ran to impressiveness over depth, a room built to communicate status rather than thought. Leonard set the object on the desk and positioned the lamp close. He worked quietly, using small tools from his leather bag, a magnifying lens, a fine brush, a thin probe he ran along the interior of the brass panel. He made small sounds occasionally. Not words, just the sounds of a mind carefully working through something significant. I sat in the chair across from the desk. My grandfather had taught me patience. He learned it from years of watching the world move faster than it needed to. 15 minutes passed, maybe 20. Outside, I could hear the dinner losing its shape. The music had stopped. Voices came in short bursts and fell away. Someone laughed once and stopped. Victor's voice rose briefly, then settled. Leonard set his tools aside. He sat back and looked at the object in front of him for a long moment, saying nothing. Then he stood and walked to the study door. Before entering the main room, he turned and closed both doors behind him. Deliberately, one after the other. The lock clicked into place. The living room had thinned while we were in the study. But when Leonard appeared in the doorway, the room pulled itself back together. People moved closer without being asked. When something important is about to be said, the body moves toward it before the mind decides to. Leonard stood near the center of the room. He was not building to anything, not performing. He simply said it. This piece should not exist here. The room went completely still. Victor broke first. His laugh came out short and unconvincing. "Then what is it?" he said. "Some old thing she pulled from a dead man's storage." Leonard did not acknowledge the comment. He turned to speak, and when he chose who to address, he did not look at Victor Hallberg, who owned the house. He did not look at Daniel, who was my husband. He did not look at the men who had laughed the loudest 2 hours before. He looked at me. "Mrs. Hallberg," he said, "I need to ask you about your grandfather. His name, his history, what he told you about this object, and how he came to have it." I nodded. My hands were steady. My voice, when I spoke, did not shake once. The questions Leonard asked were careful and specific. My grandfather's full name, the country he came from before immigrating, the decade he arrived, whether he had ever worked in restoration or anything connected to historical objects. I answered each one clearly and without hurrying. When I finished, Leonard was quiet for a moment. He looked at the object, then back at the room. He stated the value. Not loudly, not dramatically. He said it the way a doctor delivers a diagnosis, clearly, knowing it would land whether or not he raised his voice. The number had 7 figures. Millions. The room held absolute silence. Then someone near the back made a small, involuntary sound. A sharp exhale came from the direction of the bar cart, and from my left, a clean, bright crash, a crystal glass slipping from someone's fingers, shattering on the marble floor. No one bent to pick it up. Every face was recalculating. The laughter from 2 hours ago was still in the air. Not gone, just transformed into something far heavier to carry. People were hearing their own voices joining in, and feeling what that meant now. The woman by the window, the same one who had smugly raised her phone to film my humiliation, watched her own smirk crumble into stunned silence, the color draining from her face as the weight of her own cruelty crashed down on her. Marianne Kroll stepped forward. I would learn her full name later. She had been standing at the edge of the gathering, watching Leonard's examination with the careful attention of someone who already understood most of what he had found. Her voice was measured and precise. "That number is incomplete," she said. Every head turned toward her. "The object carries that assessed value on its own," she continued. "But this piece is not standalone. It belongs to a documented collection from the early 1940s, believed permanently lost during the war. 4 pieces in total. 3 have been accounted for, 1 in a national museum in Vienna, 2 in private collections. The 4th has been missing for over 80 years. She let that sit. Until now. The silence that followed was different from all the others, denser, full of things people were afraid to say out loud. Eyes moved back to me, to the object, to the crumpled brown paper sitting near the sideboard, where a waiter had placed it an hour ago like it was nothing worth keeping. Victor had not spoken since Leonard stated the number. But now his voice returned, and something in it had changed. The confidence had thinned. What sat beneath it was much closer to alarm. "Let's talk privately," he said, looking directly at me. I did not move. I stood exactly where I had been when Leonard delivered his assessment, and I looked at Victor Hallberg across the room. "Say it here," I said. It wasn't loud. The room was so quiet that words at a normal volume traveled further than they should. Victor's expression shifted. The smooth, practiced control he wore like a second face showed its first real crack. Small but visible. He glanced at his business partners, at his old friends, at the people who had laughed when he held up my gift like a prop. They were all watching. Waiting. He had spent 65 years being the most powerful person in every room he entered. He had built that power through money, reputation, and the steady performance of confidence that others had long mistaken for substance. But the same room was watching him now, and the story being told by that watching was not the one he had spent decades writing. He cleared his throat, adjusted his hand inside his jacket pocket. He opened his mouth, then he closed it again. For the first time in every year I had known him, Victor hesitated. Not the calculated pause of a man building towards something. A real hesitation. The kind that belongs to a man who does not know what to say. Victor recovered. He was too practiced to stay off balance long. He straightened his jacket and moved toward me with a careful smile, the kind that suggests warmth while offering none. He stopped 2 feet away. Close enough to imply a private conversation even with 40 people surrounding us. "Thora," he said, smooth and easy, "this is clearly significant. I understand that, but let's be practical. I can make you a very generous offer right now, a fair price, in cash, resolved tonight before anything gets complicated." He named a number, substantial, not close to what Leonard had indicated, but enough that several nearby guests shifted with visible interest. "No," I said. "No explanation, no negotiation. Just the word, placed firmly and left there." Victor blinked, his smile adjusted. "Thora, no." A few guests exchanged glances, and then Daniel spoke. He had been quiet all evening, hovering at the gathering's edge, saying nothing useful at any moment that mattered. But now he stepped forward from where he had been standing near the bookshelf. "Thora," he said, "just hear him out." His voice carried the careful tone of a man who believes he is being the reasonable one in the room, but I heard what lived underneath it. I turned and looked at my husband. Daniel had a way of making things sound sensible that had taken me years to finally see clearly. He used words like practical and realistic, and let's not be emotional, and for a long time those words had guided me back to stillness. I told myself he was the steady one, and I was the one who needed anchoring. But standing in that room, I heard something different. Not steadiness, not concern for me, calculation. "It's a significant amount of money, Thora," Daniel said. "Think about what it could mean. A piece like this comes with real responsibility, storage, insurance, legal complications. Selling is the sensible choice." He said, "Sensible, the way you say a word when you need it to do all the work for you." I looked at him for a long moment. 6 years. 6 years of just ignore him and "you're too sensitive," and "my father doesn't mean it the way you're hearing it." 6 years of being quietly managed by two men who never once genuinely asked what I thought. I reached down, I slipped my wedding ring off slowly and held it between my fingers. I said nothing. I offered no explanation. I just held it and looked at him. Daniel stared at the ring in my hand. His expression moved from patience to something approaching alarm. Before he found words, Victor cut in. "She's being dramatic," he said. His voice aimed for ease but didn't quite land. "Thora, we can handle the personal side later. Right now?" "I can't sell it," I said. That stopped him. "What do you mean?" "The piece cannot legally be sold, not by me, not under the current conditions tied to its origin." Victor's eyes narrowed. The warmth he had been performing vanished completely. "That's very convenient," he said flatly. "Extremely convenient timing for a brand new condition to appear." He looked at Leonard. It was a demand disguised as a glance. He wanted Leonard to call it nonsense and give him something to work with. Leonard did not cooperate. "She is correct," Leonard said plainly. "Under international cultural property protections applied to objects from documented wartime losses, pieces of this classification cannot be transferred through private sale without a formal authentication review. That process takes months at minimum, often considerably longer." "Months," Victor repeated. "At minimum," Leonard said. He did not soften it. Victor absorbed this in silence. His jaw moved slightly, the way it does when someone is chewing something they cannot swallow. Marianne Kroll stepped forward with the ease of someone who had been waiting for exactly the right moment. "There is something this room should understand," she said. She did not look at me when she said it. She looked directly at Victor. "When you handled this object earlier tonight," she let the word handled sit there. "You removed it from its wrapping without knowing what it was. You turned it over without support. You set it down on a hard surface without any protection beneath it." She let the sentence finish itself. "Objects of this classification are fragile in ways that aren't always visible. Specific humidity, impact, certain types of light, all of these cause damage that cannot be reversed. What occurred in this room tonight, before anyone understood what this piece was, could have caused irreversible harm to something that belongs to history, to the public record, to all of us." The gasps that followed were quiet but completely genuine. Victor laughed, fast, reflexive. "Well, no one knew at the time," he said. "That's hardly." He reached for the agreeable laugh the room usually gave him. It did not come. Not one face joined him, not a single smile appeared. Hands moved toward pockets, phones came out, but not to record me this time. The atmosphere in Victor Hallberg's room had changed so completely that the space itself felt different. I watched it happen in real time. The people who had laughed hardest were standing noticeably apart from him now. Old friends who had orbited his confidence all evening had drifted away. The way people move from something they want distance from. Business partners had paired off in quiet conversations that had nothing to do with what they were discussing before. 3 guests had already slipped out of the room entirely. Victor was still talking, still managing, still performing, but his audience had dissolved around him. Someone near the fireplace said something low to the person beside them. The second person nodded. Neither looked at Victor. I was standing close enough to hear. "Reckless," the first person said quietly. "That is the only word for it." Victor heard it too. I could tell by the small, involuntary tightening across his shoulders, the movement of a man who steps on something unexpected in the dark and catches himself. He moved to the bar cart and poured another drink. His hand, wrapped around the glass, was not quite steady. The room had stopped belonging to him several minutes ago. He simply hadn't finished accepting it yet. I had not planned to tell the full story here. Not tonight. Not in front of these people, but Leonard looked at me and gave the smallest nod. The truth of the object, where it came from, what my grandfather had done to protect it, was part of what would shape how it was handled going forward. So I told it. My grandfather came from a small town in Eastern Europe. During the war, his family lost nearly everything. But before the worst arrived, an older neighbor pressed this object into his hands and told him to keep it hidden. He said it was part of something important. He said it needed to survive, even if neither of them did. My grandfather survived. He carried that piece for the rest of his life. He never tried to sell it. He just kept it carefully. The way you keep a promise to someone who trusted you with something they could no longer carry themselves. He told me the story once, when I was 11. When he died, it was the one thing he left specifically to me. My voice was steady when I finished. My hands were still. I looked up. Daniel was watching me. For the first time all evening, he looked like a man finally seeing something clearly and hating what the clarity revealed about himself. Victor had been still while I spoke. For him, that alone was unusual. But when I finished, he straightened, set his glass down, and crossed his arms in the deliberate way of a man regrouping. "All right," he said quietly. He named a new number. Much higher than the first. The kind meant to end conversations before they become arguments. He stated it without blinking, the way you spend money to prove a point rather than make a genuine purchase. Several guests reacted visibly. A quiet exhale near the window. Someone's posture shifting. The piece, the documentation, everything confirming its connection to the collection, he said. Clean transaction. I will personally manage the authentication through my high foundation. The amount in your account before the end of the month. The room watched me. A few guests wore the expression of people who expect someone to fold, who have already decided the other person doesn't have enough ground to stand on. I looked at Victor Hallberg. He had embarrassed me in front of 40 people. He had mocked my grandfather's legacy. He had called a piece of irreplaceable history a thrift store relic and nearly let a waiter carry it away like garbage. The corners of my mouth moved slightly upward. It was the first genuine smile I had shown all evening. "One thing first," I said. Victor waited. His expression was patient in the practiced way of a man who is certain he has already won. "A real apology," I said. "Not a business apology. Not a quiet word in a side room after the guests are gone. Here. In this room. In front of everyone who was at that table when you held up my grandfather's gift and made it into a joke." I kept my voice level and clear. "For tonight, for what you said in the hallway about me not belonging here, for 6 years of small comments worded carefully enough to deny but placed exactly where they were meant to land. For my husband who learned from you that looking away was the same as keeping peace." I looked around the room briefly, then back at Victor. "Say it here, genuinely, all of it, then we can discuss the object." The silence that followed was the most complete of the entire evening. Victor's face was still, not the blank stillness of a man with nothing to say, but the tight, straining stillness of a man fighting two things at once. On one side, 65 years of never being wrong. On the other, a fortune he could almost touch. Both were real. Both were visible. Everyone could see exactly which one was winning. Victor did not speak for a long time. He walked to the mantelpiece and placed one hand on the edge of it. He looked into the empty fireplace. Then he turned back with the composed expression of a man who has arrived at his answer. "I don't believe," he said carefully, "that I have anything to apologize for. I assessed a situation incorrectly. That is a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes. A mistake is not the same as wrong behavior, and I won't pretend otherwise." He spread his hands, the practiced gesture of a reasonable man. "My offer still stands, Thora. The apology is not something I'm prepared to give. That is not how I conduct myself." The room was quiet, but this quiet had a verdict inside it. the kind of silence that has already made up its mind. Several guests who had been watching closely exchanged glances and looked away. A woman near the entrance turned toward the hall. A man by the bar set his glass down and checked his watch. No one argued for Victor. No one offered a comment or a redirecting laugh. The social machinery that had always surrounded him, the reflexive agreement, the collective polite pretending, had simply stopped working. He had refused. And in that refusal, he had lost the room entirely. I nodded once, quietly, as though I had expected exactly this. I had made the call 2 days before the dinner. I want to be clear about that. I had not walked into Victor Hallberg's estate planning for all of this to unfold this way. What happened in that room happened because Victor made choices, and every one of them had a consequence he hadn't prepared for. But I had made one decision in advance. Before I drove 6 hours, before I wrapped the object in brown paper, I had contacted the National Heritage Institute. I spoke with their acquisitions director. I described the piece, its history, its connection to the lost collection. I told them about my grandfather, what he had carried, and why. They were deeply interested. They sent Marianne Kroll to the dinner as an unofficial representative, with my knowledge and no one else's. I had already signed a letter of intent to donate. So when I nodded in that room, it was not the beginning of a decision. It was the completion of one made quietly alone in advance. I looked at Leonard. "Please contact the Institute," I said. "The donation is confirmed." Victor stepped forward. "Thora, it's already done," I said. I looked at Daniel. He had opened his mouth. He closed it again. The piece was going to a national museum. Irreversible. Legally binding. Untouchable. Victor Hallberg would never own it. I picked up my coat from the chair near the hallway entrance. I did not rush. I put it on calmly, found my bag, and looked one last time at the crumpled brown paper on the sideboard. It had done its job. I walked toward the front door. Marianne caught my eye as I passed and gave a small nod. Leonard was on the phone with someone at the Institute. 3 guests near the entrance stepped aside without being asked. Daniel said my name. Once. From somewhere behind me. I did not stop. I opened the front door and stepped outside. The night air was cool and clean. I stood on the top step for just a moment and breathed. 6 years of being managed, minimized, talked around. 6 years of just ignore him, and the slow, patient work of making a woman feel like she had wandered into a room she was never meant to be in. My grandfather had carried that piece through a war. He kept it safe when letting go would have been far easier. He left it to me because he knew I understood what it meant to hold something precious and refused to surrender it to the wrong hands. I walked to my car. They thought they were laughing at what I brought. They didn't realize I was the only thing in that room they couldn't afford. If this story struck a chord deep inside you, pour your thoughts into the comments below. And if you've ever had to rebuild your life from the ashes, or you're still quietly rebuilding it piece by piece, you're exactly where you belong. Hit subscribe, leave a like, and stay close for the next story. The smell of damp roses and Pinot Noir will haunt me forever. That was the scent of my grandfather's funeral, held on a cold March morning in Napa Valley, with 300 mourners standing on the hillside where he planted his first vines 50 years earlier. I was 22, clutching the program with my grandmother's pearls in my pocket, and I was the only person actually crying. Papa Thomas Hartwell raised me since I was 7, after my father died in a car accident on Highway 29. He taught me to read weather by smelling fog at dawn. He taught me a great wine is 20% skill and 80% patience. He taught me family was everything. That last lesson was the one he got wrong. My name is Eliza Marie Hartwell. I'm a 22-year-old viticulturist and the owner of an $8.3 million vineyard. Before I dive into what happened next, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Also, drop your city and local time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone's tuning in from. Alright, back to the story. While I watched his casket descend into the earth, my Uncle Douglas was pacing the far end of the property with a surveyor's tape measure, laughing into his phone. My mother caught my eye across the grave and looked away too fast. Something was very wrong. I did not know yet that I was standing in the middle of a plan 5 years in the making. A plan to steal everything Papa built with his bare hands. The 340 acres, the wine library worth millions, the brand name, all of it. And I had exactly 14 days before the probate court sealed everything in their favor. 14 days to fight for my family's legacy, or lose it forever. 3 days before he died, Papa called me while I was studying for my last final at UC Davis. It was 10:47 p.m., and Papa never called after 9. I picked up on the second ring. His voice was steady but quiet, the way it got when he was thinking very hard. "Eliza, listen carefully," he said. "I need you to remember 3 names. Can you do that for me, Mia?" I grabbed a pen. Rosa Delgado, Lucas Ramirez, James Holloway. I wrote them on the back of a viticulture textbook. I asked what this was about. He said, "You will know when you need to know. Promise me you will memorize them." I promised. Then he said something strange. "If anything happens to me, do not trust your mother with anything. Not a document, not a password, not a single word." I asked what he meant. He laughed softly, that dry laugh of his, and said, "I love you more than the vines, more than the wine, more than my own breath. Remember that." The line went dead. 72 hours later, he was found in his study, a full glass of Cabernet untouched beside him, an empty prescription bottle on the floor. The coroner ruled natural causes, heart failure at 79. But Papa's heart had been stronger than mine. His cardiologist had told him so at his last checkup, 1 week before his death. I only learned that 3 weeks later, and when I did, I felt the first crack in the lie. The will reading was held in the formal dining room of the estate, beneath a chandelier Papa imported from Bordeaux in 1982. James Holloway, Papa's attorney for 41 years, sat at the head of the table. My mother, Vivian, sat to his right, wearing black pearls and a smile so tight it looked painful. Uncle Douglas sat beside her with a leather briefcase already open, pen in hand, as though he expected to sign something immediately. I sat at the far end next to Rosa, the housekeeper, who reached under the table and squeezed my knee. James cleared his throat. "To my beloved granddaughter, Eliza Marie Hartwell, I leave the entirety of my Napa Valley estate, including all 340 acres, the winery operations, the brand licensing rights, the wine library, and the residential property, valued collectively at $8.2 million. The silence was a physical thing. My mother's mouth opened slightly. Uncle Douglas's pen stopped moving. He looked at James, then at my mother, then at me. His eyes were the color of wet slate. He said, very calmly, "There must be some mistake." James slid a document across the table. "It is Thomas's most recent will, signed and witnessed on February 14th of this year. Notarized. There is no mistake." My mother stood up so fast her chair tipped over. "We will see about that," she said. And then she walked out without looking at me, her heels clicking like a countdown on the hardwood floor. By 9 a.m. the next morning, Uncle Douglas was on the front porch of my cottage with 2 coffees and a folder. He was not the kind of man who knocked twice. He sat on the swing Papa built for my 10th birthday as though he owned it. "Eliza, sweetheart," he said, pushing the folder toward me. "I know this is a lot. Losing Papa, inheriting all this responsibility. A young woman your age should be enjoying life, not managing a multi-million-dollar operation." I opened the folder. Inside was a cashier's check for $3 million and a bill of sale transferring the vineyard to Hartwell Holdings LLC. I had never heard of Hartwell Holdings LLC. "We are prepared to close today," he said. "Your mother and I have been running the business side for years. We know the staff, the distributors, the tax situation. You focus on finishing school, travel, find yourself. $3 million is a beautiful life." I said I needed to think. He smiled, the kind of smile that does not reach the eyes. "Of course. But Eliza, the longer this drags on, the more the estate loses in probate fees. Every week costs you $50,000. Think smart, not emotional." He left the check on the swing. After his car disappeared down the driveway, Rosa came out onto the porch. She did not look at the check. She looked at me. "Miss Eliza," she whispered, "come to the kitchen. Now." Rosa poured me a cup of coffee I did not drink. Her hands were shaking. "Your grandfather," she said, "he made me promise. If Douglas ever came with papers, I was to give you this." She pulled a manila envelope from the flour canister on the counter. It was sealed with red wax, stamped with Papa's family crest. Before I could open it, my mother walked in. She had let herself in through the garden door like she used to when I was a kid. Her eyes flicked to the envelope. Rosa quickly slid it under a dish towel. "Eliza," my mother said, her voice sugar over something sharper. "I just saw Doug's car leaving. Please tell me you took his offer." I said I had not decided. She sat down hard, pressing her fingers to her temples. "Sweetheart, you have no idea what you are taking from this family, from me. Your uncle and I have given 15 years of our lives to that vineyard. There are agreements in place, promises your grandfather made, things you do not understand." I asked what agreements. Her eyes snapped up. "Nothing you need to worry about. Just sign the papers, Eliza, for me. For us." She reached for my hand. I pulled it back. Something in her face changed. The sugar vanished. "Do not make me regret raising you," she said. When she left, Rosa handed me the envelope. Inside was a single sheet, 3 names, and 1 sentence that made the room tilt sideways. The sentence in the envelope read, "Trust no one in this family except Rosa, Lucas Ramirez, and James Holloway. They know what to do. I love you, Papa." I was still staring at it when my fiancé Marcus walked through the front door carrying 2 suitcases. He had moved in 3 weeks before Papa died, something my mother had suggested, repeatedly for nearly a year. He dropped the bags in the foyer and crossed to me, pulling me into a hug. "Baby, I heard about Doug's offer. He just texted me." My stomach turned. "Why is Doug texting you?" Marcus laughed too easily. "He knows I work in finance. He wanted my opinion." Marcus worked at Cross Capital Partners, the investment firm Uncle Douglas founded. I had never questioned it before. He met my uncle at a charity event 2 years ago, 3 weeks before Marcus and I started dating. "Eliza, I think you should take it," Marcus said. $3 million is generous. The vineyard is going to be a nightmare. Papa was in his 70s. He was slowing down. The books are probably a disaster. I asked how he knew about the books. He blinked twice. "I do not. I am just assuming." He kissed my forehead. "Let us go to dinner tonight, celebrate the offer." I smiled and said yes. Upstairs, I locked the bathroom door and started to cry. Then I stopped, wiped my face, and started planning. Every word he just said was a lie. And I had just realized I was sleeping next to a spy, an enemy. That night I waited until Marcus fell asleep, then walked down to Rosa's cottage behind the main house. She was awake, sitting at her kitchen table with her rosary. She looked up without surprise, as though she had been expecting me for hours. "Your grandfather hired me in 1997, she said. 3 months after your grandmother died. He paid me double because I promised to treat this house like my own. I have kept every secret he ever asked me to keep." She poured 2 glasses of cold water. 2 years ago, he started acting strange, locking his study, making phone calls late at night. One morning I found him at the kitchen table at 4 a.m. with bank statements spread out. He was crying, Mia, your grandfather, crying. I asked what the statements showed. She shook her head. "I do not read English well enough for numbers, but he told me, Rosa, my son-in-law is stealing from me. From the vineyard, from Eliza." My chest tightened. "He hired a man named Lucas, a detective. He told me to memorize a phone number in case anything happened." She slid a folded paper across the table. A phone number, a name, and the word urgent underlined 3 times. "Your grandfather told me," Rosa said, "if he died suddenly, I was to call this number within 24 hours. I called it the day of the funeral." She looked at me, eyes wet. "Lucas is waiting for you. He has been waiting for 11 days. Lucas Ramirez asked me to meet him at a diner in Yountville, at a corner booth, at 7 a.m. He was already there when I arrived, a broad man in his 50s wearing a leather jacket, black coffee in front of him, a manila folder sealed with tape. He did not smile when he shook my hand. "Eliza," he said, "I am sorry about Tom. He was a friend." He slid the folder across the table. "Before you open this, I need you to understand something. Your grandfather hired me 18 months ago, not because he suspected something, but because he had already confirmed it. He wanted evidence that would stand up in court. He wanted to protect you." I asked what my grandfather had found. Lucas took a long breath. "Your Uncle Douglas has been siphoning money from the vineyard for at least 5 years. Forged signatures on loan documents, shell companies in Delaware and Wyoming, off-the-books wine sales to private buyers in Asia. Conservative estimate, $4.1 million over 60 months. I could not breathe. "Does my mother know?" Lucas tapped the folder. Your mother is the co-signer on 2 of the fraudulent accounts. She signed them herself. I have notarized handwriting comparisons. The waitress refilled his coffee. He did not thank her. He kept his eyes on mine. Eliza, your grandfather suspected they were going to do something far worse than steal money. He thought they were going to discredit him. He paused. And possibly much worse than that. Discredit him how? I asked. Lucas leaned forward. They were building a case that your grandfather had dementia. For 2 years they had been documenting things, little things. A dinner where he forgot a cousin's name. A day he got lost driving home from the grocery store. A doctor's note they pressured him into signing, which he later had his cardiologist override. He opened the folder and showed me photocopies, appointment logs, voicemails. Uncle Douglas had left with a geriatric psychiatrist in Santa Rosa, asking about capacity evaluations for a hypothetical family member. A draft document, dated 8 months before Papa died, proposing a conservatorship where Uncle Douglas would assume full control of the estate. Your grandfather found the draft on a shared printer in the estate office, Lucas said. That is when he called me. I felt sick, but he never lost his mind. He called me 3 days before he died. He was sharp as ever. Lucas nodded. Which is why he changed the will in February, in a private notary office, with James Holloway and 2 witnesses from outside the family. He made sure it was airtight. He also wrote 3 sealed letters, 2 of which I have. The 3rd, he gave to Rosa. I asked about the sealed letters. Not yet, Lucas said. We open them in order. The first letter is to be opened only when you meet me. That is now. He slid the first envelope across the table. My name was written in Papa's handwriting. My hand started shaking before I even touched it. I opened Papa's letter with trembling hands, right there in the booth. The coffee went cold. The waitress stopped coming over. Papa's handwriting was neat, deliberate, unshaken. My dearest Eliza, if you are reading this, I am gone, and they have started. I need you to know 3 things. First, I loved you like my own child, and I was proud of the woman you became. Second, every document, every account number, every piece of evidence Lucas has is real. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. Third, the vineyard is yours, but the fight will be yours too. There is a safe in the barrel room behind the 1996 Reserve Cabernets, 2nd row from the back. The combination is your birthday, forward and reverse. Inside the safe is something they do not know exists. Use it at the right moment, not a second before. Trust Lucas, trust James, trust Rosa. Trust your own eyes. Do not trust your mother, your uncle, or the man sleeping next to you. I am sorry about Marcus. I did not want to believe it either, until I saw the bank transfers from Douglas's firm into his account. $100,000 paid in 5 installments since the week before he proposed. You deserve better. You will have better. Be patient. Be ruthless. Be the woman I raised you to be. I love you to the roots of the oldest vine on this land. Papa? I folded the letter. I did not cry. I planned. Lucas's second folder was thicker than the first. Over the next 3 hours, he walked me through every forgery. In April 2021, Uncle Douglas had taken out a line of credit in Papa's name for $2.3 million, using the vineyard as collateral. The signature was a near-perfect copy, but the notary was a man on Douglas's payroll whose license had since been revoked. The loan funds had been wired to a company called Hartwell Holdings LLC, incorporated in Delaware, with Uncle Douglas listed as managing member and my mother as 49% owner. I had never heard of the company. It did not appear on any Hartwell Vineyards document. They used the loan to buy a property in Sonoma, Lucas said, pulling up photos on his tablet. A 12-acre estate with a pool, a guest house, a private tennis court. Bought in 2022. Titled to Hartwell Holdings. Your mother stays there on weekends. She tells Tom she is visiting friends. Lucas flipped to another page. Second forgery. Papa's signature on a personal guarantee for a wine distribution contract. The contract routes 12% of all international sales to a Cayman Islands account. Also, Hartwell Holdings. The numbers kept adding up. By the time Lucas closed the folder, I had seen evidence of fraud totaling $4.1 million. And one line on the last page of documents made me physically nauseous. Life insurance policy on Thomas Hartwell. $2 million. Beneficiary, Hartwell Holdings LLC. Activated 6 weeks before his death. They took out a life insurance policy on him? I whispered. Lucas's jaw tightened. Not they, her, your mother. Signed as next of kin. The policy was activated 6 weeks before Tom's death. The medical exam was signed by the same doctor who had been documenting his cognitive decline. $2 million, lump sum, pays out next week unless the probate court freezes it. I asked if this meant what I thought it meant. Lucas chose his words carefully. It means motive. It means pattern. It does not mean we can prove what happened to him. Tom's death certificate says natural causes. A toxicology screen was never ordered. His body was cremated per his will 3 days after death. He saw my face. But Eliza, listen, Tom knew this might happen. He left instructions. His cardiologist, Dr. Evelyn Park, performed a full physical 10 days before he died. His EKG was clean. His blood work was normal. There is a notarized statement from Dr. Park in the third sealed letter, along with a hair sample he gave her, stored in a private lab. If we ever need to test, we can. The waitress cleared our mugs. The sun had risen. The diner had filled up. I looked at Lucas and said, "What do I do next?" He smiled for the first time. "You go home. You kiss your fiancé, you hug your mother, you act like you are considering your uncle's offer, and you buy us 7 days. 7 days to catch a killer." I nodded, stood up, and paid the check. 7 days. That was the window. In that time, I had to uncover enough to survive the probate contest. Uncle Douglas would inevitably file, verify the forensic evidence, and get sworn statements ready for court. I also had to make sure no one suspected I knew anything. The acting began at breakfast. I came home to Marcus in the kitchen, making me an omelet. I kissed him and thanked him for being patient. He smiled, relieved. "So you are considering the offer?" I said I was leaning toward yes, but wanted to think through the tax implications. He actually fist-pumped when he turned away. That evening I met my mother for coffee in St. Helena. She hugged me for a full minute. She cried. She said Papa would have wanted peace in the family. She suggested I keep a small house on the property for emotional continuity and let Doug handle everything else. I nodded. I said I would think about it. As we were leaving, I accidentally knocked her purse over. Her phone slid out. The screen lit up with a text preview. She sounded convinced. "Love you, V." The sender was saved as James H. James H. as in James Holloway. My grandfather's attorney. The man who read the will. The man who was supposed to be the family's most trusted legal ally. The man who had just, apparently, been sleeping with my mother. My mother scrambled to grab the phone. She laughed too hard. I laughed with her. I had just added a fourth name to my list. Back home that night, I waited until Marcus was in the shower. His phone was on the nightstand, face up. I knew the passcode. I had watched him type it 100 times. The most recent message was from Doug C. "She is at dinner with Viv. Keep pushing the sale. Do not let her talk to James. He is getting sloppy." I scrolled up. Weeks of messages. Months. Does she know about the Sonoma property? How much does the kid actually care about the vines versus the money? If she asks about the February will, tell her Tom was confused. One message from 2 months before Papa died stopped me cold. "Tom had an appointment with Dr. Park yesterday. I need you to find a way to delay the next one. Be creative." There was another thread, labeled with just a $sign. Wire transfer confirmations. Every 2 weeks, $20,000 each, from Cross Capital Partners to Marcus Whitaker. I took screenshots of everything. I airdropped them to my laptop. I deleted the airdrop history from his phone. I put it back on the nightstand exactly as I had found it. When Marcus came out of the bathroom, steam rising from his shoulders, I smiled and told him I had decided to take the offer. He hugged me so hard it hurt. "I love you," he said. "You are making the right choice." I said I loved him too. He fell asleep with his arm around me. I did not sleep. I listed every lie he had ever told me, at least the ones I have uncovered, and assigned each one a dollar value. At 4 a.m. I walked down to Rosa's cottage. She was awake. She always was. "I have a plan," I told her, "but I need your help." She nodded before I even finished the sentence. I asked her to tell me everything she had ever overheard in the main house. Not guesses, only things she had heard with her own ears. She sat back and closed her eyes. "6 months ago, your uncle was in the study with your mother. I brought tea. Your uncle said the trust has to dissolve before the girl turns 22. After that, it converts and we lose access. Your mother said, then we do it before her birthday. My birthday was April 2nd. Papa died on March 9th. 24 days before my birthday. There is more, Rosa said. 2 weeks before he died, your grandfather sat me at the kitchen table. He asked me to hide something. Something he said was too dangerous to leave in the safe. I asked what? Rosa stood, walked to the old armoire in her bedroom, and pulled out a loose board from the back panel. From inside the wall, she withdrew a small wooden box. He told me to give this to you only when you were ready to fight. I think you are ready. I opened the box. Inside was a USB drive, a handwritten ledger of every fraudulent transaction for 3 years, and a small brass key. Engraved on the key were 3 words, barrel room safe. I slipped the key into my pocket, like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The next morning, Uncle Douglas filed a petition in the Napa County Probate Court to contest my grandfather's February will. His filing alleged that Papa had been diagnosed with early-stage vascular dementia 18 months before his death, that he had been manipulated by the housekeeper, Rosa Delgado, into signing a new will that benefited an unqualified 22-year-old with no business experience, and that the rightful estate plan was a will dated March 2019, which had named my mother and uncle as primary beneficiaries and me as a residual heir with a $500,000 cash inheritance. The filing included a sworn affidavit from a geriatric psychiatrist, Dr. Warren Caldwell, who claimed he had evaluated Papa in September and diagnosed moderate cognitive impairment. It included medical notes. It included prescription records. It included a photograph of Papa looking confused in a parking lot. It was very convincing. If you had never met my grandfather, James Holloway called me personally to warn me. His voice was steady, professional, careful. He offered to represent me in the contest. I thanked him and said I would consider it. I hung up and called Lucas. James just offered to represent me. Lucas laughed, the kind of laugh that had no humor in it. Of course he did. He wants to be in the war room so he can leak every strategy to your mother. Do not hire him. I have an attorney for you. Her name is Vanessa Moreno. She eats men like Douglas for breakfast. She was already driving up the hill. Vanessa Moreno took the case within 2 hours of our meeting. She read the files, called Lucas, and immediately subpoenaed records from Dr. Warren Caldwell's practice, Dr. Evelyn Park's practice, and the Napa County Pharmacy Network. She filed a counter motion citing undue influence, fraud, and conspiracy. Then she drove me to meet Dr. Evelyn Park at her home in St. Helena. Dr. Park was in her 60s, tall, silver-haired, with a posture like an old oak tree. She did not sit down. Tom Hartwell, she said, was one of the sharpest men I ever treated. I want you to look at these. She handed me a binder. Every annual physical for 12 years. Full cognitive evaluations on the last 3. All normal. All above his age bracket. His final physical, 10 days before his death, included a MoCA cognitive score of 29 out of 30. Dr. Park showed me her own signed and notarized statement. I will testify under oath, she said, that Thomas Hartwell was mentally competent the last time I saw him alive, and that Dr. Caldwell has never treated him. I called Caldwell's office myself 2 weeks ago. They have no record of Tom as a patient. The medical notes in that filing are fabricated. Vanessa looked at me. This is the turning point, Eliza. The forged medical records are going to destroy them in court. But we do not play that card yet. We let them commit further. Dr. Park nodded. Give them rope. They will hang themselves beautifully. I agreed. That night, I walked to the barrel room alone. It was a stone building, half buried in the hillside, where Papa aged his reserve wines. The door was heavy oak. The air inside was cool and still, 55 degrees year-round. I found the 1996 Cabernet Reserve on the second row from the back, just as Papa had written. I moved 6 bottles carefully. Behind them, set into the stone wall, was a small steel safe. I tried the combination. My birthday, forward, 4-2-19. Then reverse, 19-2-4. The lock clicked. The door swung open. Inside was an envelope, a leather-bound journal, a microcassette tape, and a small digital voice recorder. I opened the envelope first. It contained deeds. Original deeds. Not copies. The original deed to the 340-acre vineyard. The original deed to the Sonoma property Hartwell Holdings claimed to own, which was titled to my grandfather personally. The original deed to a third property I did not know existed, in Healdsburg, which Papa had purchased in my name in 2016. The journal was Papa's handwriting dating back 5 years, every suspicious transaction logged, every overheard phone call transcribed, every receipt, every email printed and pasted. It was a case file my grandfather had built, day by day, while pretending to be a grieving widower slowing down with age. The recorder had 4 files on it. I pressed play on the first. It was my mother's voice, crystal clear. "Doug, we have to move faster. He is getting suspicious." I listened to all 4 recordings sitting on the cold stone floor of the barrel room. The first was from 8 months ago. My mother and uncle, discussing timing. The second was, from 6 months ago. My uncle alone, on a phone call, telling someone named Warren that the medical documentation was worth whatever he asked. The third was from 4 months ago. My mother and Marcus, in what sounded like a hotel room, though I prayed it was only a lunch meeting. She said, "Eliza trusts you completely. That is all we need." Marcus said, "I will not let you down, Viv." The fourth recording was the one that tore me apart. It was dated 5 days before Papa died. My uncle was speaking quietly. "The prescription is at the pharmacy. Refill his heart medication with the substitute tomorrow. Make sure Rosa is off that day." There was silence on the tape. Then my mother's voice, "Are you sure about this, Doug?" And my uncle said, "Do you want to live in the Sonoma house or not?" The tape ended. I sat in the barrel room for an hour. I did not cry. I called Lucas. He answered on the first ring. I read him the transcript. He was silent for a long time. Then he said, "We need Dr. Park to subpoena the pharmacy records, and I need to know who filled the prescription on March 7th. 2 days later, we had the name. It was not Rosa. It was a pharmacy tech who had since disappeared to Mexico. While Lucas and Vanessa pulled pharmacy records, a woman appeared at my front gate. She was in her 30s, with dark hair and eyes almost identical to my own. She introduced herself as Catherine Morales. She said she was my grandfather's daughter. My first instinct was that she was a con, a grifter who had read the obituary and come for a piece. I told her to leave. She handed me a photograph instead. It was Papa, 30 years younger, holding a baby in the same yard where I was standing. Written on the back in his handwriting was the name Catherine, and a date, 1989. "He paid for my college," she said quietly. "He sent my mother money every month until she died. He came to my wedding. He met my son. I did not ask for anything from his will. I do not want anything. I only came because he told me if something ever happened to him, to find you. He said you would need family you could trust." I let her in. Over the next 2 hours, Catherine laid out a story that matched Papa's journal perfectly. Her mother had worked as an accountant for the vineyard in the 1980s. Papa had been married to my grandmother at the time. It was a mistake he regretted but never denied. He had supported Catherine her whole life, privately. She had 2 binders of her own. More evidence, more transactions, and 1 document that Lucas did not have. Uncle Douglas's first forgery from 6 years ago, with a bank routing slip attached. Catherine had been working at a regional bank in Santa Rosa for 11 years. She was a compliance officer. Without knowing any of us, she had flagged a suspicious wire transfer involving Hartwell Vineyards in 2020. The transfer had been reversed and forgotten, officially. But she had kept her own file, because the name Hartwell meant something to her that no one knew. When Papa told her 2 years ago that he suspected fraud, she quietly began assembling evidence from her side. She had access to banking networks Lucas did not. She had tracked money moving through 6 shell companies and 3 offshore accounts. She had printouts, screenshots, internal compliance memos. She had a paper trail going back 6 years. "My father wanted to protect you," she said, "and I am finishing what he started. Not for the money. For him." I asked why she had stayed hidden. "Because he asked me to. He said your mother would never accept me, and it would hurt you to learn the truth the wrong way. He wanted to introduce us himself. He did not get the chance." I hugged her. She held on, like she had been waiting 22 years. I introduced her to Vanessa and Lucas the next day. Within 48 hours, we had a full forensic financial timeline, corroborated by independent banking records. Uncle Douglas's fraud stretched back further than we knew. And the signatures on the earliest forgeries, according to a handwriting expert, were not even his. They were my mother's. The scheme had started with her. I invited my mother, Uncle Douglas, Marcus, and James Holloway to Sunday dinner at the main house. I said I had made a decision and wanted to announce it to the family. Rosa cooked. The dining room was lit by candles. I wore a navy blue dress my grandfather had given me for my 21st birthday. Hidden under the collar was a small microphone connected to a digital recorder in the pantry. Upstairs, Vanessa, Lucas, and Catherine monitored the feed in real time. Over dinner, I told them I had decided to accept Uncle Douglas's offer, with one condition. I wanted the Sonoma property deeded back to the vineyard because I believed it had been bought with vineyard funds, and I wanted everything clean. My uncle nearly choked on his wine. My mother's fork stopped midair. Marcus looked at James. James looked at my mother. The room was a chessboard with every piece exposed. My uncle recovered first. Eliza, that property was a separate investment. It has nothing to do with the vineyard. I smiled. I thought you might say that, but I saw the original deed yesterday. It is titled to Papa personally, not to Hartwell Holdings. There is no record of the purchase money moving through the vineyard accounts in a legitimate way. My mother's voice came out tight. Eliza, where did you see that deed? I sipped my wine. Papa had a safe I did not know about. Turns out he left a lot of things I did not know about, including 4 recordings. The glass in her hand cracked. The silence at the table lasted 4 seconds, long enough for my uncle to make a critical mistake. There is no safe in that house, he said. I checked every room of that house myself after he died. I smiled again. Why would you check every room for a safe, Doug, if there was nothing for you to find? My mother's face went gray. She leaned toward my uncle and hissed. I told you not to push her. He hissed back. If you had handled Marcus better, she would have signed by now. Marcus stood up. Do not bring me into this, Vivian. I did exactly what you asked me to do. James Holloway covered his face with his hands. I told you this was going to collapse. I told you in February when the new will went through. The 4 of them began talking over each other. Accusations, defenses, blame. Every word broadcast to the recorder upstairs. I let it run for 2 full minutes. Then I stood up, poured myself a second glass of wine, and said quietly, Thank you. You have just confessed to conspiracy, fraud, forgery, and possibly something much worse, on a recorded feed that my attorney has been monitoring from the 2nd floor. The pharmacy tech who filled the March 7th prescription is being extradited from Mexico as we speak. The room went silent. My mother whispered, Eliza, what have you done? I looked at her the way Papa used to look at a grapevine that had gone bad, with sadness and with certainty. The hearing was scheduled for Thursday at 10 a.m. in the Napa County Probate Court. Uncle Douglas arrived with 2 attorneys and a thick binder of fabricated medical records. My mother sat beside him in a gray suit, rosary in hand, performing grief for the judge. Marcus sat 3 rows back, unable to look at me. James Holloway had already been suspended by the California bar pending an investigation. Vanessa Marino walked to the podium calmly. She introduced her evidence in order. Dr. Park's notarized statement and medical records, Lucas's forensic financial timeline, Catherine's compliance documents, the original deeds from Papa's safe, Papa's journal, and finally the audio recordings. Each one. The entire courtroom heard my uncle instruct someone to switch my grandfather's heart medication. The judge called a recess after the 4th recording. 2 Napa County detectives entered the courtroom when we reconvened. My uncle was arrested at the defense table. My mother was arrested in the hallway. Marcus was taken into custody outside the courthouse for his role in wire fraud and conspiracy. James Holloway had already turned himself in that morning, trying to cooperate in exchange for a plea deal. The judge ruled the February will was valid, Uncle Douglas's contest was dismissed with prejudice, and a criminal investigation would proceed separately. I walked out of the courthouse with Rosa on one side and Catherine on the other. My grandfather's will, my grandfather's estate, my grandfather's name, was mine to protect. And I would. The next day, I had the locks changed on every building on the property. It has been 11 months since the hearing. Uncle Douglas is serving 8 years for fraud and conspiracy. His sentence lengthened when pharmacy records confirmed the medication switch. My mother is 3 years into 4 at Chowchilla. She has written me 6 letters. I have not opened any of them. Marcus is serving 30 months for wire fraud. James Holloway was disbarred and is awaiting trial. The Sonoma property was returned to the estate and sold. The proceeds funded a scholarship at UC Davis in Papa's name for first-generation viticulture students. The Healdsburg property Papa bought in my name became a guest house where Catherine and her sons stay when they visit. I run the vineyard now. Rosa still lives on the property because her name is the beneficiary on a life estate Papa set up in 2018. We released our first wine under my vintage last fall. I called it Thomas's Promise. It sold out in 11 days. I am 23 years old. I inherited $8.2 million and a family's worth of betrayal. I kept the first. I buried the second. Papa's last lesson was right after all. Family is everything. Sometimes the family you are born with is not the family you keep. My therapist says I went too far, that I should have warned my mother before the recorder went live, that I should have given her one last chance to walk away. What do you think? Would you have warned her? Or would you have let her walk into the trap? Tell me in the comments. Also, if this story struck a chord deep inside you, pour your thoughts into the comments below, and if you've ever had to rebuild your life from the ashes, or you're still quietly rebuilding it, piece by piece, you're exactly where you belong. Hit subscribe, leave a like, and stay close for the next story.